He had a pump out there, and he would pump the water, and it went under the road into a trough over where the cattle were. And that's how he watered the cattle.
What were your jobs on the farm?
Well, one job that I remember doing was in the springtime when the corn grew up. As soon as we come in from school, me and my sister had to get out there and hoe that corn, cut the weeds out of it. That was about, and then I had to get the wood and the coal in to burn for the heat and for cooking.
And tobacco.
No, we didn't raise it in tobacco.
Oh, I thought you worked tobacco.
I worked in tobacco, but that was for my uncle.
Well, now, the first time I had a job, I was probably about 15. And I worked in a Newberry's 5 and 10 cent store. Now, you remember that name, Newberry's. And that was one of the first 5 and 10 cent stores. And they asked the little cheerleaders if they wanted to put on a little show in the window. And so we all went down there and put on this little show. So afterward, I asked them if I could get a job. And so they let me have a job at the dime store. And I worked at that. That was my first job. And I probably was, I don't know when I was 15 back then or not. I don't know. So.
How long did you work there?
I worked there like during Christmas and in the summer on Saturdays. I always worked on Saturdays because at the end of the day, they always had Gladolia flowers. You know Gladolias? Not big. Yeah. And my mother loved those. So on Saturday when they closed, because nothing was open on Sunday, when they closed, whatever was left, they'd reduce them. So I'd always get a few of those to take to Mother. So I know I worked on Saturday. And then I worked on at Christmas, and I worked in the summertime a little bit there before I got a better job. Yeah.
How did you guys meet?
How did we meet? Well, we met at school, at college. And it was the end of my freshman year and the beginning of your sophomore year, right? What?
I reckon that's right.
Yeah. My brother had gotten a new car, Bud. And so I asked him, I said, Bud, would you let me take that car to school the last week? And he said, yeah. So I took the car to Eastern before I was going to come home for the summer. And I had a real good friend, and she had liked this one boy all year long. And so so we walked in the grill, and he was sitting there, and I said, his name was Don. I said, hey, Don, I said, I've got my brother's car. I said, would you like to take a ride with Ann and I? And he said, yeah. He said, Jim, you want to go too? So this is kind of how it started. And so Jim went with us, and that was it. And then that summer, Jim came by on his way to California because he went out there in the summer and worked. And I wasn't home. And then that was the end of it till next year. That's how we met.
And then what happened the next year?
Well, and you know the rest of the story, you know. That was it, wasn't it? We started dating after that, and that was it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Henry?
Do you have any brothers?
Real loud.
Do I have any brothers and sisters?
Yeah.
Yes. You know Bud. You know Bud and Betty that come up there, and Bud and the two little kids? All right, Bud, the older one. That's my brother.
Big Bud.
Big Bud, yeah. And he's the only brother that I have now. They're all gone to see Jesus. So the other, I had an older sister, and she was 14 years older, and she taught me in the first grade. She really taught me to read earlier, and I went to school early. And so then I had after Sissy, there was Bob, and he was like 12 years older. And then I had Jim, my brother Jim, and then I had Bud, and then me. So I was the youngest.
5 of them.
5 of us. And he had one sister.
Tell us about your sister.
Well, she was living in California, but then she moved to Arizona, Lake Havasu City, Arizona. And I guess she's still there. I need to call her, 'cause she's had some
Yeah, probably.
she's had some health problems.
They came by our house.
Yeah.
She and a friend, a guy that she met, and her husband had died. And so he lived in Chicago. So she came by our house one summer, didn't she? And stayed
Mm-hmm.
for a few days. And we said we were going to do it again, and we just haven't done it. But she had quite a few health problems. didn't
She had 2 boys,
Yeah, she
How
had 2
old is
boys.
she?
Mike and Dwayne.
How old was she?
How is she older or younger?
She's younger
two,
than Jim.
She's 2 years younger than me.
What's her name?
Joy Colleen. We always call her Dixie. Joy Colleen.
I don't know whether you ever met her or not,
Oh,
Brian.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, a couple times.
Yeah. So that's the story of Jim's. And then my brother lived in Michigan, Bob. And he was always the one in the family that, like when I had a bike wreck one time and it really messed up my eye and it tore up the bike, he was patting me. Don't cry. I said, I'll get you a new bike. And he was working at the mill, so I mean, he could do that. So he got me, but he was always like that. And he had 6 children. He married and had 6 children. And then, but we never did get to see him very often because back then you just didn't travel that much. I mean, they had their 6 children and you
They
just didn't
lived
go.
in Michigan too.
Well, it's just like we were talking coming down here. When Jim and I were married and lived at Fort Lewis out to Washington State, you know, we didn't see our mom and dad. When I left school, we didn't see them. We just never did see them. And then one time when he was on a camp thing, I flew in and they saw Jimmy. He was 4 months old. But any of that other time, I guess I saw him twice in all those years, you know. So we really didn't see our parents at all either. But that's
Tell
the
us
way it
about-
was.
Tell us about your parents, both of you.
My parents were really good parents. They loved us.
Tell
Now-
us your names and I'll
Oh,
make sure we know.
My daddy's name was Gala Friend, and they called him GF. And he lived in the northern part of Virginia, and my mother lived in the southern part of Virginia. Her name was Myrtle. That was her mom's name too, Myrtle, Virginia.
What were the cities they were from? remember?
My mother was from Tappahannock. That's south of Richmond, just a little bit. Dad was from Grundy. You know where Grundy is? That's where Dad was from. All right. When mother went to college, mother sort of had a pretty good life at that time, and so they sent her. She went to college. Can't remember. William. It was not William and Mary, but it's kind of like that. It's a part of that. And so she went there and got her teaching degree. And so then they needed teachers up where Dad was from. And so mother and a friend came up there to teach school. And so my dad had an 8th grade education and took a test, and he was qualified to teach. You know, back then it was just different. And so he taught and mother taught, and that's how they met. And then they stayed together in the teaching field. I don't know how long, not too long. And then Dad got in the lumber business. I don't know how or what, but it was called Ritter Lumber Company then. And so he was with them several years. And then it finally merged with Georgia Pacific. And so Dad then was kind of all over the West Virginia and Virginia. And so that's the story of them. Now, Jim's mom and dad, you can tell them.
Well, I don't know.
Well, they didn't stay together, did they,
No,
Dad?
they
So
didn't stay.
he
Hey,
probably because you live with your grandparents.
my dad's name was Frank, and he stayed. He was born and raised in Carter County, Carter City. And my mother was a Carol, and she lived in Arden Hill. And I don't know how they met, but anyway.
She went to college too. I
They
found that
said,
book.
yeah, she went to
Some kind of school, girls.
some kind of college for 2 years, was it?
I believe I can't remember.
Something. But they're both, Dad had remarried and he experienced Alzheimer's. So he passed away with a massive heart attack, they say.
Mhm.
And my mother, her mind was great. She didn't have any problems. She just could not get around. She was not too mobile. But anyway, she fell and broke her hip. She lived in Arkansas, and I brought her to Estill County, and she stayed in. Well, she was in the nursing home when she passed away. And that was, I don't know what year that was.
Just
that
for a little while, they thought, but
That was probably, how long ago?
I don't know, Dad. I can't keep up with it.
I'm
Your
gonna-
kids came to see her.
Yeah, I think you were.
Hmm
I get her and Sissy mixed up.
Yeah.
Passed away.
Well,
It
she was
close together.
she was over there over by us in those little, you know, those
Yeah,
homes.
but I don't remember.
Yeah.
It was
And
houses.
then I don't know. I can't keep up
I
with
think she was
I'm
about
telling you, I don't.
85.
That's one thing I don't do much. I don't
But
dwell
she-
on when or when they did.
they kind of put pressure on me to move her to the nursing home because they said that she needed 24-hour care.
Yeah.
And then they let her go home.
Then they let her go to the nursing home.
No, and then they said they'll let her come back because we kept the apartment. Remember, thinking she might get to come back.
Yeah, well, we kept it for a while, but then I was in the process when she went to the nursing home. I was in the process of bagging everything up and moving out of that
Oh. Place
place. What was the name of it? Northwood
Northwood, but it was a nice. Well, Wendy and them were there.
Apartments, just like an apartment. So I guess I did something about every day to assist her.
Yeah, you went every day. Even at the nursing home, he fed her. Yeah, she didn't have to stay over